Early morning in Florida, the air was warm and the streets were already alive with the sounds of traffic, radios, and distant seagulls. Officer Emily Carter woke up before sunrise as she always did. She had been working with the county police department for many years, and her routine had become second nature. Coffee in a simple white mug, a quick breakfast she barely tasted, and then her uniform carefully pressed and neat. She believed in presenting herself with dignity, not just because of rules, but because she wanted people to feel they could trust her. Emily was not like many of the other officers. She was respected, but what made her stand out was her kindness. People in her department often said she had a quiet strength. She could handle tense situations without raising her voice, and she listened when others ignored. Her job had given her plenty of challenges, but she never lost her sense of humanity. On this particular morning, she was assigned to a transfer duty at the county jail. A prisoner needed to be taken to a medical facility for a special checkup. Transfers were common, but something about this case was different. The prisoner was an older man named Michael Reyes. He had been in prison for many years and was now very sick. Word around the station was that he did not have long to live. Emily arrived at the jail and signed the paperwork. The officer at the desk gave her a quick briefing, telling her Michael was quiet, weak, and not a problem to handle. "He barely talks," the officer said. "You won't have any trouble." Emily nodded and went to meet him. When she first saw Michael, she noticed his thin frame, his shoulders slouched as though carrying years of invisible weight. His skin was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he held onto a small folded photograph. His eyes, however, were what caught Emily's attention. They weren't the eyes of someone angry at the world. Instead, they looked tired, sad, and heavy with regret. Michael avoided eye contact with most of the guards, but when Emily greeted him politely, he gave her a small nod. That simple act made her pause. It was rare for prisoners to respond warmly, especially during transfers. She felt an odd pull to look closer. As they walked toward the transport vehicle, Emily noticed how carefully he protected the photograph in his hand. It looked worn, edges frayed, colors faded from time. For a brief moment, she wondered what memory he carried with that picture. She did not ask, at least not yet, but she filed it away in her mind. The drive started quietly. Michael sat in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the photo, while Emily focused on the road. Usually, she preferred silence during transfers. It kept things professional. But there was something different about this moment. She could sense that behind Michael's silence was a story, one that weighed heavily on him. As the miles passed, Emily found her thoughts drifting. She had chosen this career not only because she wanted to enforce the law, but also because she wanted to protect people. She often thought about her father's words, "Justice without compassion is only half the job." Those words echoed in her mind as she glanced in the mirror at Michael. At one point, she decided to break the silence. "Are you comfortable back there?" she asked in a calm tone. Michael looked up, almost surprised that she had spoken to him in a kind way. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. His voice was weak but respectful. It was the first time she had heard him speak, and she noticed he chose his words carefully. The road stretched ahead, palm trees swaying in the warm breeze, and Emily realized this wasn't going to be just another ordinary transfer. There was something about this man that made her curious. She wondered what mistakes had brought him here, what regrets he carried, and why he clung to that photograph as though it were the only thing keeping him alive. She thought about her own life for a moment. Emily lived alone in a small apartment not far from the beach. She had friends, but her job often left her little time for anything more. She sometimes questioned whether she gave too much of herself to her work, but then she reminded herself that people needed officers who cared. Maybe that was her purpose. When she glanced back again, she saw Michael looking out the window at the passing neighborhoods. His eyes softened at the sight of children playing in front yards and families walking together. There was a quiet sadness about him, as if he were watching a life he once knew but could never have again. Emily could not help but feel the atmosphere in the car shift. It was no longer just officer and prisoner. It was one human being silently observing another. She thought about the many cases she had seen, the hardened criminals who showed no remorse, and how rare it was to encounter someone who carried sorrow more than anger. The drive continued, but Emily's heart told her this was the beginning of something unexpected. She didn't know what role she would play in Michael's story, but she sensed it would not end with just a routine trip. Something deep inside whispered that she was about to be tested, not in strength or authority, but in compassion and courage. By the time they arrived at the facility, Emily realized that she was no longer thinking about him as just another prisoner. She was thinking about him as a man, broken by choices and time, but still holding on to something important enough that he carried it with him through every moment. That day, in the small details of silence, in the way he held a photograph, and in the way he looked at the world outside the window, Emily felt the story beginning. A story she didn't yet know, but one that would touch her life more deeply than she could have imagined. The ride back from the medical facility was quiet at first. Emily kept her eyes on the road, but her thoughts were busy. She kept replaying the way Michael had looked at that photograph, holding it as if it was his entire world. She had seen many prisoners over the years, but rarely had she seen someone cling to an object with so much care. Something about it made her chest heavy. She wondered what story lived inside that faded piece of paper. In the rearview mirror, she noticed Michael shifting uncomfortably. His breathing was shallow, and his hand trembled as he tucked the picture back into his pocket. Emily's instincts told her to check on him. "Are you feeling all right back there?" she asked softly. Michael hesitated, then nodded. "I'll manage." His voice carried a rough edge, but beneath it was exhaustion. She didn't press further, but after a few more minutes of silence, Michael cleared his throat. "Officer, may I ask you something?" Emily glanced at the mirror again. It wasn't common for prisoners to open up during transfers, but his tone wasn't one of defiance, it was almost pleading. "Go ahead," she replied. Michael stared at his hands for a moment before speaking. "I don't think I've got much time left." He paused as if weighing every word. "And before I go, there's one thing I wish for. Just one thing." Emily slowed the vehicle slightly, curious yet cautious. "What is it?" He pulled the photo from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. Even from her angle, Emily could make out the image of a young girl with bright eyes, smiling at the camera while holding a teddy bear. The paper was worn thin, creases cutting across the child's face, but it was clear the picture had been carried for years. "This is my daughter," Michael whispered. "Maria. I haven't seen her in over 20 years. His voice cracked, and for a moment, he closed his eyes, as though the memory was too painful. "She was just a little girl when I was arrested. I missed everything: her first day of school, her birthdays, even her high school graduation. I missed it all." Emily felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what crime he had committed or how much pain his daughter had carried because of it. But in that moment, he wasn't just a prisoner in shackles. He was a father with an unhealed wound. "What are you asking me, Michael?" Emily said carefully, keeping her tone neutral yet compassionate. "I want to see her. Just once. Before it's too late," he said. "I don't expect her to forgive me. I don't even expect her to speak to me. But I just want to see her face again. That's all." The words hung heavy in the air. Emily's training told her this was impossible. The rules were strict. Prisoners couldn't make personal requests like this, especially ones that involved family outside of official channels. But the human inside her felt something stir. She thought of her own father, how she still visited his grave whenever she could, whispering about her life as if he were listening. She couldn't imagine being cut off from him completely, never having the chance to say goodbye. She didn't answer right away. The car rolled forward, the Florida sun casting long shadows across the road. Finally, she said, "That's not something I can promise. You understand that, right?" Michael nodded. His eyes looked distant, but grateful that she hadn't dismissed him outright. "I know. I just needed to tell someone. You're the first person in years who's even looked me in the eye like I mattered." Emily tightened her grip on the steering wheel. His words struck her harder than she expected. She thought about the people society had forgotten, the ones who lived behind bars and carried their mistakes to their graves. They were still human. And here was a man who didn't ask for freedom, or pity, or even forgiveness. He asked for a single moment of connection. They reached the jail, and as Michael was escorted back inside, Emily found herself lingering. She couldn't shake the image of that photograph, the innocence of a child frozen in time, and the desperate hope in a father's eyes. That evening, Emily sat in her small apartment, unable to focus on anything else. She tried reading a book, watching the news, even brewing tea, but every thought returned to Michael and his daughter. She wondered where Maria was now, what kind of life she had built without her father. Did she still think of him? Did she carry anger, sadness, or perhaps questions that had never been answered? Emily thought about her badge, the oath she had taken. She had always believed that law enforcement was more than just rules. It was about justice, but justice was not always simple. Sometimes it was about compassion. Sometimes it was about giving someone the dignity of being heard. The next morning at work, Emily found herself glancing at the prisoner logs. She saw Michael's name, his health condition marked clearly in the notes: terminal illness, ongoing treatments, limited time. Her heart sank further. It was no exaggeration, he really didn't have much time left. At lunch, she sat in the cafeteria, pushing her food around her plate. A colleague joked about retirement plans, another about vacation days, but Emily barely listened. She was turning over an idea in her mind. It was risky. It might even put her in trouble. But she couldn't ignore the thought. What if she tried to find Maria? Emily knew it wasn't standard procedure. She wasn't assigned to family outreach, and no one had asked her to get involved. But she felt an invisible pull, as if fate had placed Michael in her care for a reason. She remembered the look in his eyes when he handed her that photo. It wasn't manipulation. It wasn't a trick. It was pure longing. That night, she sat at her desk at home, opening her laptop. She typed Maria Reyes, Florida into the search bar, though she knew the name was common. Pages of results appeared, none certain, many too vague. She tried narrowing it down with details from Michael's file: his last known address, his family's old neighborhood. Slowly, small clues began to appear. She discovered a woman named Maria working as a nurse in a hospital 2 counties away. The age matched what Michael had said. Emily clicked through public records, piecing together details. The evidence grew stronger. It was likely her. Emily leaned back in her chair, conflicted. Should she reach out? Should she involve herself in something so personal? It wasn't part of her job. But then she imagined Michael, frail and fading, waiting for a chance that might never come. Her decision was not final that night, but the seed had been planted. She closed her laptop, staring at the ceiling as she lay in bed, unable to sleep. The thought repeated in her mind: sometimes duty is more than rules. Sometimes it's about doing what is right. By the next morning, Emily felt her resolve building. She didn't know what Maria would say. Maybe Maria would refuse. Maybe she would even be angry. But Emily knew she had to try. Not for herself, not even for her duty as an officer, but for a man who had nothing left to hope for except one final wish. And as she dressed for work, She tucked Michael's words into her heart like a silent promise, I just want to see her face again. That's all. The next morning felt different for Emily. She went through the motions of her daily routine, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. The coffee in her cup tasted bitter, and even the sunrise, which she usually admired on her drive to work, barely caught her attention. She could not stop thinking about Michael Reyes and the quiet desperation in his voice when he said he wanted to see his daughter one last time. His words had not left her since that day, circling in her mind like a song that refused to fade. At the station, her tasks were the same as always, reviewing reports, handling calls, and assisting where needed, but she found her thoughts drifting. She wondered about Maria, the daughter Michael had spoken of with such longing. She pictured a woman who had grown up without her father, perhaps angry at him, perhaps heartbroken, perhaps simply trying to forget. Emily knew that reaching out might not only stir up old wounds but also put her own position at risk. Yet she couldn't ignore the pull in her heart. During her lunch break, Emily opened her laptop again, going back to the notes she had scribbled the night before. The name, the hospital, the city, it all pointed to one person. A Maria Reyes working as a nurse in a community hospital about 2 hours away. The age matched almost perfectly with what Michael had said his daughter would be now. Emily sat with the information for a long time, staring at the hospital's website, where the staff names were listed. She clicked on Maria's profile picture. It was small and grainy, but even so, Emily could see a woman with strong features, a calm smile, and eyes that looked both kind and tired. She wondered if those were the same eyes from the little girl in the faded photograph Michael carried. For several days, Emily wrestled with her conscience. Should she call? Should she drive there? Should she let it go? The rules told her to step back, but her heart urged her forward. Every time she saw Michael's name on the logs, her decision became harder to avoid. Finally, one evening, after her shift ended, she sat in her car outside the station and dialed the hospital's number. Her hands trembled slightly as she asked the operator to connect her to Maria Reyes. The line rang, and for a moment Emily almost hung up. But then a gentle voice answered. "This is Maria Reyes." Emily's heart skipped. She hesitated, then introduced herself carefully. "Hello, my name is Officer Emily Carter. I'm calling from Broward County. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Maria's tone shifted, guarded but polite. "No, it's fine. How can I help you?" Emily took a deep breath. "This may sound unusual, and I want to be respectful. I've been in contact with a man named Michael Reyes. He asked me to reach out. He says he's your father." There was a sharp silence on the line. Emily could almost hear Maria's breathing change. When Maria finally spoke, her voice carried both surprise and pain. "My father? He hasn't been a part of my life for decades. Why are you calling me about him now?" Emily chose her words carefully. "I understand this is difficult. Michael is very ill. He doesn't have much time left. He asked me to try to contact you. He doesn't expect forgiveness. He just wants to see you once before he passes." For a long moment, Maria said nothing. Emily could imagine her standing there, phone pressed to her ear, flooded with memories she had buried for years. Finally, Maria spoke, her tone heavy. "You don't know what you're asking. He left me. He chose his mistakes over me and my mother. Do you know how many nights I cried because he wasn't there? Do you know what it's like to grow up watching other kids with their fathers, while mine sat behind bars?" Emily closed her eyes, her own heart aching at Maria's words. "I can't imagine your pain," she admitted softly. "And I'm not here to excuse his choices. I'm only here to tell you what he asked. It's not about changing the past. It's about giving both of you a chance to face each other, even if only for a moment." Maria's voice cracked. "Why should I? Why now, after all these years?" Emily thought carefully before answering. Because sometimes closure isn't for the person leaving, it's for the one staying. You've carried this hurt for a long time. Maybe seeing him, hearing his words, will give you answers you didn't even know you needed. Or maybe it won't. But at least you'll know you had the choice. Silence filled the line again. Emily waited, not pressing, not rushing. She could sense Maria's heart battling between anger and longing. Finally, Maria whispered, "I don't know if I can face him. I don't know what I'd even say." "You don't have to know right now," Emily said gently. "All you need to decide is whether you'll give yourself the chance to try. If you want, I'll be there. You won't be alone." That last sentence seemed to break something inside Maria. After a pause, she said quietly, "If I do this, if I agree, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll be there the entire time." "I promise," Emily said firmly. "You won't have to go through it alone." The call ended shortly after, with Maria saying she needed time to think. Emily placed her phone down, exhaling deeply. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a beginning. The next few days felt heavy with anticipation. Emily went about her duties, but every moment she wondered if Maria would call back. Finally, late one evening, her phone rang. She saw the hospital number flash across the screen. With a deep breath, she answered. Maria's voice was steadier this time, though still uncertain. "I've thought about it. I'll come. But only if you're there, just like you said." Emily's chest filled with relief. "I'll arrange everything." "Thank you, Maria. You're stronger than you know." When the call ended, Emily sat in the quiet of her apartment, a wave of emotion washing over her. She had done what she felt was right, even if it was risky. Now came the hardest part: arranging the meeting. She knew it would not be simple. The system had rules, paperwork, approvals, and many ways to say no. But she also knew that sometimes rules had to bend for the sake of humanity. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of Michael's face when he would see his daughter again, and of Maria's trembling voice agreeing to come. She prayed that the meeting would bring healing, not more hurt. As dawn broke, she sat by her window, watching the first light spill across the Florida streets. She whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "I'll make this happen. For him. For her. For both of them." The day of the meeting arrived slowly, almost as if time itself knew something important was about to happen. Emily barely slept the night before. She kept imagining every possible outcome: Maria storming out in anger, Michael collapsing in grief, or silence filling the room so thick that no words could break it. She knew she had taken a great risk arranging this. She had bent rules, pulled favors quietly, and promised people she trusted that she would keep everything under control. Yet deep inside, she believed it was the right thing to do. That morning, Emily dressed carefully in her uniform, making sure every detail was neat. She wanted to be professional, but also calm and reassuring. She knew Maria would need her strength, and Michael would need her compassion. As she drove toward the jail, the streets of Florida blurred around her. She kept her thoughts steady by repeating the promise she had made: "You won't be alone." At the facility, the guards gave her curious looks. Most of them did not know why she had arranged for a special visitation room to be cleared. Emily gave no explanations, only firm instructions. She wanted privacy, no interruptions, no unnecessary eyes. It was not an ordinary visit, it was something deeper, something human. Michael was escorted into the small room first. His steps were slow, his shoulders hunched, and his breathing shallow. Time had not been kind to him. His hands shook as he sat down, and once again, he pulled out that old photograph, smoothing its edges with trembling fingers. His eyes darted to Emily as if searching for reassurance. She gave him a small nod. "She's on her way," she said softly. For a moment, Michael closed his eyes and whispered a quiet prayer. His lips moved silently, but Emily could sense his desperation. He looked both terrified and hopeful, a man standing at the edge of something he had longed for yet feared at the same time. Minutes later, the door opened gently. Maria stepped inside. She wore simple clothes, her hair pulled back neatly, but her face revealed the storm inside her. Her hands were clenched tightly around her purse strap, and her eyes flickered nervously as she took in the room. The moment she saw her father, she froze. Michael looked up at her as though seeing a miracle. His breath caught, and his voice cracked. "Maria," he whispered, tears instantly welling in his eyes. Maria did not move closer. She stayed near the door, her body tense. For years, she had imagined this moment, and yet nothing could prepare her for it. Memories rushed into her mind, the nights waiting for a father who never came home, the years of silence, the birthdays spent with only her mother's comfort. Anger rose inside her chest, but so did an ache she had carried for far too long. Emily stood quietly in the corner, watching the scene unfold. She knew her role was not to interfere, but to hold the space for them. She felt her own chest tighten as she witnessed the fragile line between pain and love playing out before her eyes. Michael slowly stood, though his legs shook under his weight. He didn't take a step forward, as if respecting her space. Instead, he spoke through trembling lips. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you even standing in this room. But thank you for giving me this chance." Maria's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Why now? Why after all these years? Do you know what you left me with? Do you know how many nights I cried wondering why my father chose prison over me?" Michael's tears fell freely. He nodded, each word heavy with regret. "I know. And I think of it every single day. I can never undo what I did. I can never give you back the years I stole from you. All I can say is that I was a fool, and I am sorry. I'm so deeply sorry." For a long while, the room was filled with nothing but silence and the sound of Michael's quiet sobs. Maria stood still, her arms crossed, her heart torn between anger and pity. She wanted to scream, to walk out, but something kept her feet rooted to the floor. She looked at the photo in his hand, the photo of herself as a child. A wave of emotions hit her. He had carried that picture all these years, through every cell, every night, every day of regret. She whispered, almost to herself, "You kept that picture." Michael looked down at it, then back at her. "It's all I had of you. When the walls closed in, when the nights were endless, this picture kept me alive. You kept me alive, Maria, even when I had no right to hope." Her eyes burned with tears she had held back for decades. She hated herself for wanting to cry. Part of her wanted to keep the wall of anger strong, but another part, the little girl who once adored her father, wanted to collapse into his arms. She bit her lip hard, holding herself together. Emily stepped forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "Maria, you don't have to forgive him today. You don't even have to decide how you feel right now. This moment isn't about the past being erased. It's about allowing the truth to be spoken." Maria's eyes flickered toward Emily, then back to her father. Slowly, her grip on her purse loosened. She reached inside and pulled out a small necklace, a silver pendant shaped like a heart. She held it up, her voice trembling. "This was from you. You gave it to Mom when I was little. I've kept it all these years. Sometimes I hated it. Sometimes I loved it. But I never threw it away." Michael's hands shook violently as he reached out, not to take it, but simply to touch the table where she placed it. His voice broke into sobs. "I can't believe you kept it. I thought I had lost every part of you." Maria's tears finally spilled over. She walked slowly toward the table and sat down across from him. For the first time in over 20 years, father and daughter were face to face. The years between them were heavy, but in that small room, time seemed to pause. Michael reached his hand forward, stopping short, afraid she would pull away. Maria hesitated, staring at his frail hand. Then, with trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. The touch was fragile, almost like glass, but it was enough. The dam inside Michael broke completely. He wept, clutching her hand gently as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered over and over. "Thank you for letting me see you. I don't deserve this, but you've given me peace I never thought I would have." Maria's own tears flowed silently. She didn't know if she forgave him, not yet. But in that moment, she let herself feel what she had buried for years, the love of a daughter for her father, broken but still alive. Emily felt tears in her own eyes as she watched them. She had promised Maria she wouldn't be alone, and she had kept her word. But she realized something else too: both Michael and Maria had been carrying chains of regret and pain, and for the first time, those chains were beginning to loosen. The meeting lasted only an hour, but to them, it felt like a lifetime lived in a single space. When it was time to leave, Maria stood slowly, her face streaked with tears. Michael remained seated, exhausted but strangely at peace. As Maria walked to the door, she turned back once more. "I don't know if I can forgive you. But I'll try. That's all I can promise right now." Michael nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "That's more than I ever dreamed." Emily opened the door for Maria, giving her a supportive glance. And as Maria left, Emily looked back at Michael. He was still holding the necklace on the table, his tears falling onto it like drops of release. For the first time since she met him, Emily saw not just a prisoner, but a father who had finally touched a piece of the life he had lost. The weeks that followed the meeting were quiet but heavy with meaning. Emily returned to her daily duties, but something inside her had changed. She had seen many things during her years as an officer: crime scenes, arrests, anger, and despair, but what she had witnessed in that small visitation room stayed with her more than any of it. The image of Michael clutching his daughter's hand, and Maria finally letting her walls lower just enough to touch him, played in her mind over and over. Michael's health declined rapidly after that day. The prison doctor noted his condition had worsened, and though treatments continued, everyone knew the end was near. His body was giving up, but strangely, his spirit seemed lighter. Whenever Emily saw him during her rounds, she noticed something different in his eyes. He was still frail, still tired, but there was peace in him now. He would nod at her, sometimes even whisper thank you when no one else could hear. It was as though that one meeting had lifted a weight he had carried for decades. One evening, after her shift ended, Emily sat at her desk writing her notes. She thought about the choices she had made. She knew some might question her actions if they ever found out. She had bent the rules, used her authority in ways not strictly written in the manual. But in her heart, she knew she had done the right thing. She had not given Michael freedom from prison, but she had given him freedom from loneliness. She had not erased Maria's pain, but she had given her the chance to look her father in the eyes and say the words she needed to say. A few days later, Emily received a call while at home. It was from the prison medical unit. The nurse's voice was calm but heavy. "Officer Carter, I thought you should know. Michael Reyes passed away this morning in his sleep." Emily sat in silence for a long moment, the news settling over her like a blanket of sorrow. She had known it was coming, but knowing did not make it easier. Her chest tightened as she thought of the man who had asked for nothing more than to see his daughter one last time. Tears welled in her eyes, but she let them fall. They were not tears for a criminal or a prisoner. They were tears for a father who had finally found a piece of peace before leaving the world. The funeral was small, held quietly with only a few present. The prison arranged the burial with little ceremony, as they usually did for inmates. But to Emily's surprise, Maria came. She stood by the grave, her hands folded tightly, her face pale but steady. Emily stood a little distance away, giving her space. When the coffin was lowered into the ground, Maria finally let the tears flow. She whispered something so soft Emily could barely hear it. "Goodbye, Dad. I hope you rest now." Her words carried both sadness and release, as if she were finally letting go of years of pain. After the burial, Maria walked toward Emily. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her voice was clear. "You didn't just help him. You helped me too. For years, I told myself I hated him, that I wanted nothing to do with him. But deep inside, I was still that little girl in the picture. I needed this, even if I didn't know it." Emily placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were brave to come. I know it wasn't easy." Maria shook her head. "I wasn't brave. You were. You made it happen when no one else would. Thank you for keeping your promise." For Emily, those words were enough. She didn't need recognition, she didn't need to explain her choices to anyone else. Hearing Maria say that was the reward she never expected but deeply valued. As days turned into weeks, Emily went back to her routine. Arrests, patrols, paperwork, it all continued as before. Yet her heart carried something new. She realized that her badge was not just about enforcing the law. It was also about protecting dignity, about seeing people as human beings even when society had turned away from them. One evening, after finishing a long shift, Emily drove toward the coast. She parked near the beach and sat on the hood of her car, watching the sun sink into the horizon. The sky burned with shades of orange and gold, the waves crashing gently against the shore. She thought about Michael and Maria, about the broken bridge between them that had been mended just enough before it was too late. She imagined Michael somewhere beyond this world, finally free of the walls that had held him, finally carrying peace instead of regret. She imagined Maria, slowly healing, perhaps finding strength in knowing she had faced the man she once loved and hated at the same time. Emily let the wind brush against her face, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She whispered quietly, "Rest now, Michael. You found what you were looking for." Her heart felt heavy yet full. She knew she had been changed by this journey. She had learned that sometimes the smallest acts, listening, caring, taking a risk for someone else, could carry the greatest meaning. In the end, the world would remember Michael as a prisoner. But to Emily, he was a father who carried a photograph for 20 years. To Maria, he was the man who, even with all his mistakes, loved her until his last breath. Emily climbed back into her car and started the engine. The road stretched ahead of her, just as it always did. But now, she carried something more, a quiet understanding that justice was not just about rules, but about mercy. She had fulfilled a prisoner's last wish, but in doing so, she had also reminded herself of why she wore the badge in the first place. And as she drove home, the sound of the waves still echoing in her mind, Emily knew that though the world might forget this story, she never would. It had broken her, healed her, and changed her all at once.